Hi everyone, Stephanie Wicker here. I'm a behavior consultant in Sydney, Australia. I also serve other areas in Australia as well for those interested, and you can learn more about me at stephaniewicker.com. Today I'm going to be talking about what to do when my child tantrums. So I've received this question a lot. Now, I am going to try to answer this like I have my other what to do when questions under 5 minutes or in 5 minutes. However, you're going to see that this is a really hard question to answer. And the reason that is because what defines a tantrum? A tantrum is a very broad term for a bunch of specific behaviors that kind of serve as a pattern, right? So they're very challenging behaviors that repeat themselves. So answering this question is a bit harder than some of the other ones where we're just dealing with one specific behavior. Because a tantrum is so broad, we have to look a little bit more behind the curtains at what is going on with your child's development. So where I want to begin with this, we're going to look at maybe three different areas that will hopefully support you when your child tantrums next, okay? So what I want to begin with though is why do tantrums repeat themselves? Why do they continue to happen? I get this asked a lot. I told my child to stop, to cut it out. Why are you doing that? But they won't listen to me, and I told them if they just waited, they'd be able to have ice cream after dinner, and they're still screaming. I don't understand. Why does this behavior continue? So I want to start with that. So basically, the reason that tantrums repeat themselves is because, well, they work. They work very, very well. We all do behavior. All behavior serves a purpose, and we all do behavior for a reason. So there is always a function behind it, and it's basically a way to get our needs met the best way that we know how. So a child might use a little bit of trial and error at first, but once they learn that specific actions get them specific results, then they tend to stick with it. It's actually quite clever. So tantrums unfortunately become a habit because they're very effective. So imagine if you didn't want to put your socks on, and how would you get out of putting your socks on? Well, you know what? If you kicked your feet really hard and you screamed your head off, and then mommy was like, okay, never mind, no socks. Wow, that really worked. I'm going to do that next time. I'm going to stick with it. And that's what happens. They try things out until something works. And normally, the biggest, loudest behavior is the one that's the most effective. Okay? And once they learn that it's effective, they stick with it. Right? So that leads me to the next thing is how do they learn what works and what doesn't, and how does that troubleshooting happen? Well, I think the first thing to look at is the overwhelm that a child feels when they're doing something that's beyond their control. A lot of their experiences are, in fact, beyond their control. So I imagine that during that process of development, when they still haven't quite learned how to regulate their emotions, never mind understand and identify their emotions, right? That's something that comes much later in their development. So when they're still a toddler, 3, 4 years old, you're going to be seeing tantrums a lot more than when they're 7 or 8 years old, because by then they've learned how to regulate emotions and how to understand and identify emotions. But before then, it's a lot harder, and they troubleshoot a lot more. So you'll see one day they're great. They put their socks on, no problem. Or one day they say, no thanks, mom. Oh, that was lovely. Okay. But then a couple days later, they're back to kicking and screaming. And that's because they're going through that process of learning what works and what doesn't. So again, that's all troubleshooting. And I think what leads them to that is usually a sense of overwhelm. I don't know what else to do, so I'm going to try everything. So they get very, very overwhelmed in the moment, and it tends to turn into screaming and crying. And then guess what? The screaming and crying is very effective. So, okay, I'm sticking with that, right? So I have to go quickly now. I realize I'm taking too much time. We're going to run out of our 5-minute limit here. So there are 4 functions behind all behaviors. And this is true of tantrums as well. Now remember, I can't get too specific because the word tantrum is a very broad label that people identify differently depending on the child, depending on the environment, depending on the scenario. So there's many different things that define tantrums, right? So let's just look at it in a broad sense. Why do behaviors happen? Because I can't say why is that tantrum happening. I can't be that specific, unfortunately. Unless someone gives me a specific scenario, I can't answer that question, which is why I ask a lot of questions, by the way. You'll notice I probe a lot when I'm trying to get information from people so I can answer their questions a bit more fully. Anyway, so there's 4 reasons that behavior happens. So one reason might be to get access to an item. Another reason might be to get out of doing something like not putting your socks on. Another thing might be to get attention. Maybe when they scream and cry and fall to the floor, mommy and daddy scoop them up and say, we love you so much and we don't want you to be upset. And all of that attention feels so good that they're like, wow, that worked really well. I got their attention straight away. I might try that again next time. And then another reason is something called self-motivation. So the behavior in and of itself is motivating. An example of this might be it's funny to the child. Maybe they're doing a behavior because it's funny to them. Or maybe they're teething. So biting gives them a wonderful sense of relief because they're having all of this pain in their mouth and they find that's the best way to soothe themselves. So that might be why they're biting because of it's self-motivating. So those are the reasons that behavior happens. Now, my recommendation of what to do when your child tantrums is first to understand that it's not personal. There is always a reason behind it. It's not because they want to make you angry or get revenge or anything like that. All right. That doesn't come until they're older. But with toddlers and children basically under 5 or 6, if you're still seeing tantrums with 5 and 6-year-olds, then just know that it's because they're feeling very overwhelmed and they're troubleshooting, trying to find the best way to get their needs met. So what you can do is you can identify the function behind the behavior, the purpose that is driving the behavior. Once you do that, once you understand that they're just trying to get out of doing something, or they just really need your attention right now, or maybe they just really want that lollipop right now. Once you understand what the function is, you can start to teach a replacement. And that replacement, as it sounds, will take the place of the tantrum. But this takes commitment. This takes anticipation. So you anticipate the behavior and you're more proactive rather than being reactive. Once we're reactive, the cycle continues and sometimes it can even get worse. So we want to be more proactive in teaching the skills that we want to see. We'll talk about that in another audio recording. I hope that this has been helpful to explain to you a little bit about what's going on in your child's brain during a tantrum and what you can begin to be thinking about when you want to shape that behavior, when you really want to start decreasing those loud problem behaviors. So we'll talk, like I said, we'll do another audio and we'll talk more about how to teach replacement behaviors.